So, what am I changing here? This is a little knob. This is probably my favorite knob in the synthesizer world, and this is known as the cutoff frequency. Now, why it's called that, I'm not exactly sure. It has something to do with limiting the overtones of that sound. So just to briefly cover a little bit of synthesis, a waveform is basically what the synthesizer is generating. It's a sound wave. Okay, so if you can imagine a wave, it goes positive, it goes negative. And depending on the type of sound that you want, you can change the shape of that wave. So we have different types of waves, which give us different timbres, of course. Like a violin might be more of a sawtooth wave, a clarinet might be more of a square wave, and if I play with the cutoff frequency here, you can get more of a brassy sound here, or more of a stringy sound. Back to the triangle, and the sine wave is kind of the dullest, darkest of the waves that we have. You'll hear this in a lot of hip-hop records. You'll hear those low. So there's the sine wave. And this is just one oscillator going, and the oscillator is basically the thing that generates the wave. So we have our oscillator, we have waveforms, different shapes, and then we can change the cutoff frequency. The second thing, which is maybe my second favorite knob here, is the resonance. Now what the resonance knob does is it tells how narrow or how wide to make that cutoff frequency. So as I sweep the cutoff, oh, wait a second. That's with the resonance all the way down. And there it is with the resonance up about halfway. You'll notice it starts to make its own tone after a while. And then just putting it all the way back down again. Okay. And of course you have like the dubstep wobble bass sounds here, which is just modulating the cutoff. All right. So that's one thing here, is this filter. We can also have what's called an envelope. Now, an envelope is like sort of, imagine if you could give sentience to a little envelope creature. And you could tell this little envelope creature of yours to say, hey, instead of me having to turn all these knobs by myself, how about you do it for me? And so we can get sounds that sound like this. We can have the filter sort of change over time, and that gives us our envelope. And so we have attack, which it ramps up into it. If I turn it all the way down, it just cuts right in. We have the decay, which tells it how long to stay there. You can hear it. It cut off real quick. And if I max the decay, as soon as it attacks, it stays all the way up. We have the sustain, which tells it how long to hold that. And then, of course, the release, which allows it to continue beyond when you let go of the key. So we got attack, decay, sustain, release. ADSR makes a nice little attack, and then it decays down to wherever you have the sustain, and then it releases from there. Okay. So, and you can do this for, of course, the frequency, the cutoff frequency, like I just showed you here. So that's attack, and then it cuts down. And there's the frequency over opening up all the way. So you can play with the ADSR a little bit and get all kinds of different ways to sort of modulate that sound over time. So if you want it to swell, or do you want it to cut right in like this? So we have filter. We can also change the amplitude in the same exact fashion, ADSR, so we can have it get quieter and then swell in and then long release. So basically, when we get to that release, you have to have the oscillator continue on, but you also have to make sure that filter is still open. Otherwise, you get this. See, right now the filter is closed, but the oscillator is still holding through here. So if you want it to actually hold, you gotta release the amplifier and the filter. So they both work off of ADSR. Okay, let's keep moving here. Moving a little quick. By the way, if any of y'all want me to go back to anything or clarify anything, leave it in the comments right over here. And all of these are not special features, by the way. These are all in every single synthesizer, every virtual instrument synth that you will find, all the software, all of the hardware. If you're using a workstation like I'm using, you might have to navigate through some menus to get to some of these options. But it's on there. It's in there somewhere. So here's our second preset that we started with, which again sounds like kind of a bass. But I can change the pitch here a little bit. And this is interesting. What I'm doing is I have an oscillator here. Let's turn that up. So this is called tuning the oscillator. It tells you basically just which note do you want, which frequency do you want this note to play. And you can get really creative with, if you have multiple oscillators, you can tune it into kind of a little chord. I usually like to tune them maybe a fifth apart or an octave apart. So this is actually right now playing both of these notes from this one key, and you can hear them separately. There's one, there's the other one. You blend them together, and you can do really cool stuff like you can have the one note stay the same and then change the pitch of the second one, and etc., etc. Now I want to demonstrate something really cool as well. This is called frequency modulation. So this takes the frequency of one oscillator and it kind of modulates the timbre of a second oscillator. So check this out now. So this is taking, let me see. This is taking oscillator 2, and that pitch of whatever you put in oscillator 2, I'm just turning the same wheel here. The pitch, that same pitch is now modulating that first oscillator. So kind of interesting stuff. And you can get these sort of hybrid, kind of weird alien talking sounds. And that's pretty fun to mess around with, especially as you're playing, to sort of dynamically change it. Right? And you can get some crazy effects with that. Now you put some delay on that, and you got yourself a nice little science fiction sound effect here. You get the idea. So that is known as FM, or frequency modulation. Let's keep moving along here. This is another preset. And as you can hear, we have two oscillators in two different pitches. Now, check this out. I have a wheel over here on my keyboard, and as I pull the wheel up, it does this weirdness. And let's try this. So I'm going to explain what I'm doing in a second. All from one key. So what in the world is that? So what I'm doing here is called an LFO. An LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. So it kind of superimposes a super duper low frequency underneath the whole wave. And what it does is it uses this low frequency to modulate other stuff. So the low frequency can be very slow, like this. So that's a very slow, low-pitched wave in that sound, making it do that. And then as I increase the rate, you can go faster and faster and faster. What it's doing is raising the pitch of that low-frequency oscillator. So pretty cool stuff there. And then you can tell the wheel over here to change the pitch or the speed or the amount of that LFO. So we can, this is probably pretty useless, but you can do cool stuff like this. And now you get sort of this neat little vibrato that you can change the speed of as you go here with something like this. Now, here's a little tip, little secret little less intuitive trick that you might find interesting. One of the things that Bernie Worrell from Parliament Funkadelic, one of the things that he would do is not just swell the LFO as the note goes like this. He would actually do the reverse. He would start it here and then swell it into the clean regular note. So you'd have, right? So there's the little secret from that song. You might be wondering how I have never been able to get the exact sound from that record. Well, that's why, because your mod wheel's going the wrong way. It's actually supposed to be going down there. So it starts up and then you pull it down real quick. So that's a little secret for you there. What else do we have here? And last but not least, the last thing I'm going to cover here. Now, by the way, this synth does all kind of crazy stuff besides what I'm showing off here. It does note echoes and all kind of weird, it does ring modulation and all kind of strange stuff. Just covering the very basics, it's scratching the surface here. But the last thing I'm going to cover is the idea of portamento. So check this out. So this is the kind of stuff you hear in Emerson, Lake and Palmer records. You will hear the portamento actually changing over the course of the synth solo. So if you add some delay to that, you got some really cool effects that you can create. Here we go. There's an ELP record called Pictures in an Exhibition. Okay, so these are all kind of the things that you'd hear in those ELP records. You hear him doing solos live on Tarkus. All right, so that's a little crash course on synth leads, and as far as my personal preference, I tend to go with pretty simple sounds, honestly. I tend to go with the sawtooth wave, something like this with a little delay. And yeah, of course, the signature little bend going down at the end. And of course, if I'm feeling risky, I'll do a bend up. Okay. And yeah, pretty simple sound there. And on the Yamaha, I have some other synth leads that I'll just show you here. This is called the Wind Synth. Kind of a George Duke, kind of a Joe Zawinul kind of sounding thing. I've heard Jan Hammer use sounds like this before. But if you check out the portamento on this one, listen to this. You can kind of hear it snapping into those notes a little bit. I don't really like that as much. You don't notice it a lot, but it's still there, and you can... And whereas on the Nord lead, it's a really, really analog sounding portamento, which we can get. There's no snapping going on there, especially... So you can really hear it sort of slowly glide into that note. All those little in between, all those little microtones in between the black and white keys of the piano. So really interesting stuff. And obviously I like to put some delay. And that's basically all there is to it. I used the same kind of mindset for synth bass. I used predominantly sawtooth waves, and the only other bass that I really use is just that really dark, dull sounding sawtooth wave, which is... You'll recognize this from like almost every live stream. I use this bass, this type of sounding bass on everything. And you might not hear that so well on your smartphone of choice, but I still like it. It sounds grand in headphones. It'll really shake your body if you play it through some speakers or a nice sound in stereo. And so that's my sort of approach to synthesizers and waveform synthesis. I tend to just go with the sawtooth wave and then come up with a filter that I like. And I prefer to have as many knobs as possible. That's why I like this Mox 8 here, because there's lots of onboard faders and knobs and switches that you can assign to all different kinds of things. And you can put chorus effects and reverbs and all that. It's all built into the keyboard. So it makes it really easy, but you still have that tactile sensation of changing stuff and grabbing that sound and changing it to what you want. So as you heard when I went to this sound, I was like, okay, I need it a little brighter. Cutoff frequency. So there you go. You can hear the same kind of thing on both keyboards, even though one is more analog sounding and the other is completely digital. And so that's pretty much all I really wanted to get into here. If you've never touched a synthesizer before, you should be able to find your cutoff frequency. You should be able to find the tuning of your oscillator. And you should be able to find some kind of LFO so you can get some nice vibrato happening, and that gives you tons and tons of expressive control right there. In my opinion, again, more than you'd get on a regular piano, more than you'd get on a regular guitar even, or a regular violin, because you can't really change your timbre that much on a violin.